tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Today we talk about Buddhist cosmology. Now, when we talk about cosmology, I like to use another word. It's called cosmography. It's about the cosmos in terms of where different things are in the cosmos, like geography, talking about various countries and the nature of those countries and things like that. So, when we speak about the cosmos, the Buddha has not been speaking about the cosmos just for the sake of talking about the cosmos. He tried to avoid this because people didn't know much about the cosmos at that time. And if the Buddha begins to speak about it, people might have doubts about what the Buddha is talking about, because it's something very strange that he'll be talking about. But if he was present today, he would have been able to speak about it in greater detail, because the modern scientists have been doing all kinds of research, astronomy especially, and physics. They are aware of many things in the cosmos. There is the story where once the Buddha speaks about a former Buddha, and speaks about a disciple of a former Buddha who asked a question. So this former Buddha, all Buddhas, it looks like, all Buddhas, when they rise in the world, a Buddha is a rare occurrence. It's very rarely that a person is able to reach that level of growth in the mind. And there are three kinds of Buddhas. A Buddha called the Samma Sambuddha, who is the teacher Buddha, who is able to not only attain that state, is also able to teach others to attain that state. And that's the teacher Buddha, Samma Sambuddha. The other Buddha is really, because a teacher Buddha is one who is very rare, but in between the period of two Buddhas, there'll be a time when there'll be no one knowing anything about the world properly. But there are few yogis or rishis who begin to become Buddhas, in that they reach that state of perfection. But they are not able to teach others. So there will be no disciples for him. And the third kind is a disciple Buddha, who learns from a teacher Buddha. And that is what today people call Arahants. But they are also disciple Buddhas who have attained that state of perfection. So, the important thing is that a Buddha begins to become aware of the universe, and but they don't like to speak about it because other people will have doubts. So in this particular situation where the Buddha speaks about a former Buddha, he says this former Buddha went to the Brahma world and spoke to the Mahabrahma and was able to convince the Mahabrahma that he was not the creator of the world, and that he had the previous life, by getting him to recall the past lives. So all Buddhas seem to be doing that. And at the end of it, he asked his chief disciple, who was chief in psychic powers, like the Moggallana, who was for this our present Buddha, he asked him to recite a verse to be heard throughout the galaxy, that anyone listening anywhere in the galaxy can hear. And he recited this verse, and he came down to earth again, and then asked the disciples whether they heard. And the disciples said, yes, we heard that. Now when Venerable Ananda, who was listening to the Buddha relating this story, he put a question. And that question was, I like to know how far our teacher, as a Buddha, is able to make himself heard. Then the Buddha says, well, Ananda, it is not possible for you to understand that. I can explain it to you, but you won't be able to understand. The powers of a Buddha is very great, and he has infinite powers. If I begin to explain, you won't be able to understand. So if you don't understand, you might have doubts about me. So don't ask that question. Then a second time he asked, no, I will try to understand as far as I can. Please say it, so that at least I can listen to what you say and tell others about it. Then he said, no, you will not be able to understand, and you might even distort what I am saying. So best thing is not to ask that question. But he asked a third time and said, please say this. I will be very careful not to distort what you say, and I will listen to it. Then he said, okay, you have asked me 3 times, and so I will answer your question. But don't ask me any further questions. You won't be able to understand. Then he said, do you know what a small world unit, in Pali it's called the Chulani Loka Dhatu. Chulani Loka Dhatu, the small world unit. He said, no, I don't know what that is. Then he tried to explain. There is this earth, and he didn't want to go against the common beliefs among the people, because the people thought that there is a thing called the Mahameru, and around that Mahameru there are these different things coming and all that. So he didn't. He just said those things, but he said there is this sun and the planets. He didn't even want to say that the earth is moving round the sun, because those things people didn't know, because the people always thought that the sun was moving around the earth. So he didn't even want to say that. So he simply said, you know that there is this sun which is moving around an axis, and there are many suns like this, and these many suns are moving around a central axis, and thousands and thousands of suns, and these suns moving around an axis is one whole unit. So when we look at it from modern ideas, this was the description of the galaxy. He didn't go into detailed discussion of the sun and the planets and all that, but he put it in a different way so that people will not begin to doubt what he is saying and disagree with what he is saying. So he put it like that, and he said that is the small world unit, and that small world unit is the galaxy. Now the modern astronomers, they have found that the Earth and so many other planets are moving around the sun, and that is one solar system. And there are many solar systems that turn round an axis, and all these many solar systems together becomes the galaxy. So we have this galaxy which is called the Milky Way, but there are so many other galaxies, and now they are saying that there are many other galaxies, and they are also in groups like that, turning round a central axis. And there are groups of galaxies. They are called clusters of galaxies, and so they don't know much beyond this. But the Buddha said there are these groups or clusters of galaxies twice the size of this, and some 3 times the size, some 4 times the size, and so on. And a Buddha is able to speak, to be heard through many such galaxies, and it is difficult for you to really even imagine how that could be done. So when this was said, the disciple Ananda wanted to ask a further question. He said, well, I like to ask one more question, and that is, how is the Buddha able to do that? He said, well, I can explain it, but you won't understand. and so don't ask me any further questions. And he said, how I do it is, I am able to send out a beam of light, and through this beam of light I can send my sound. Now this is something, if a modern scientist listens to this, he will begin to understand it, because similar things are happening today. And what is light? It is simply a wave, electromagnetic wave with a certain frequency. So it is sent out in the form of an electromagnetic wave. So even radio waves are sent out like that. So that this is how we try to describe it. So all this shows that the Buddha was aware of a world that was very much beyond the ordinary person's way of understanding. And today the modern scientists are beginning to understand these things gradually. So the important thing is that the Buddha spoke of this world unit as the galaxy, and then he speaks about, now the galaxy is called a Sahassi Loka Dhatu. Sahassi means 1,000. It means 1,000 solar systems, really. Not that it is exactly 1,000, it's simply just a way of putting it. And then Dvisahassi Loka Dhatu, which means twice that, the size of the group of galaxies. And Tisahassi Loka Dhatu, 3 times that size. Chatusahassi Loka Dhatu, 4 times that. Panchasahassi Loka Dhatu, 5 times that. And then he goes on to Dasasahassi Loka Dhatu, 10 times that. And then he also speaks about Satasahassi Loka Dhatu, 100 times that. And he goes on like that. And this is very interesting. And so it's not only that. There is a sutra called the Sankhara Uppatti Sutra in the Majjhima Nikaya. There he speaks about the galaxies again, not as a sermon or talk about galaxies, but he was trying to explain how people can be reborn in different spheres due to the karma. And there he says, he speaks about a very interesting thing, that a Brahma who begins to think that he has created a whole galaxy, and there are these chief Brahma of a group of galaxies who begins to think that he has created that whole group of galaxies. And how each Brahma is able to see the galaxy and the group of galaxies. And there we begin to see something very similar to a modern concept. Now they speak of the solar system and the atom. The atom is, there is a nucleus, and around the nucleus you find electrons moving around the nucleus. And now, very similar to this, you find the solar system, where the planets move around the sun. And now in a whole galaxy, you find many such solar systems. And it becomes like a molecule. An atom is like the solar system, and a galaxy is like a molecule. And then we find even groups of molecules like that, which ultimately form something like a crystal. And so a crystal is a collection of molecules formed in a certain way. And a similar thing is seen where the Buddha speaks about how the Maha-Brahma of that particular group of galaxies sees that group of galaxies. And he says the first group of galaxies is the small group of galaxies. The Brahma sees like, say, a bunch of grapes. And then a higher form is seen like a gem, that is like a crystal. And then the next higher one, the Brahma sees it like a piece of gold, so like a metal, you say. So it's very similar explanation, which is very interesting. So this type of thing is very important to understand. And there is also another concept today called the black hole. And here in the sutras, we find a description of the black hole, where the Buddha speaks about a world between these different galaxies, like. And he speaks about a bottomless pit and a black, where there is no light coming. And then he says when a Buddha is born, a ray of light penetrates that. And some people living there, they begin to see, oh, there are other beings. I thought I was the only person here. It's a kind of niraya, a kind of hell like. And so even that kind of thing, that is very interesting. So the important thing is that the Buddha was aware of the galaxies and the clusters of galaxies, and so the cosmos was described by the Buddha. And even these different worlds, like the Devalokas and the Brahmalokas, the Buddha speaks about them, and they are simply worlds present in the cosmos. And when the Buddha speaks about the different worlds, he doesn't really refer to things like galaxies and solar systems and planets and things like that. Instead of speaking in those terms, he speaks from an experiential point of view. Now that means, now that kind of description in terms of solar systems and galaxies is simply what a human being might be able to see through a telescope, or see it from a human eye or human way of thinking. But here the Buddha speaks about the different worlds in a different way, and that is, he breaks up the worlds into three kinds: the Kama Loka, the Rupa Loka, and the Arupa Loka. The Kama Loka are the sensual worlds, and the Rupa Loka are what are called the form worlds, and the Arupa Loka are what are called the formless worlds. So when we talk about the Kama Loka, we are talking about sensual in the sense that we begin to experience pleasure and pain. So the Kama Lokas are the worlds where we begin to experience pleasure and pain. So these worlds again can be divided into three kinds. The pleasure worlds, where you experience only pleasure, there is no pain. These are the Devalokas. And then there is the pain worlds. These are the Niras, where you experience only pain. There is no pleasure at all. And then there are the mixed worlds, where you get both pleasure and pain. So the mixed world is a world where we get pleasure and pain, but even in the mixed worlds, there are different levels. Because some worlds you get more pain and less pleasure. Some other worlds you get more pleasure and less pain. Like, for example, the difference between the human life and the animal life. The human being is able to become aware of the pleasure more than the animal, because of the nature of the skin and the nature of the senses and the nature of the body itself. And the pain worlds are more like the more pain, and there is no pleasure at all. So there are these different worlds that we can talk about when we talk about the sensual worlds. Then when we talk about the form worlds, we are speaking about the awareness of a body or form, but there is no experience of pleasure and pain. And there we experience happiness in the mind, but not sensual experiences. And there is also the formless world, where we don't even experience forms and bodies. It's like empty space. These are the formless worlds. We can describe these in more detail later, and I hope you understood this to some extent. And so may you all be well and happy. Thank you. Now there is